Welcome everyone to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Welcome everybody to the 30-minute Midas touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony. And with me, as always, is my co-host, the movie star, Mark Tipton.
Well, I'm afraid movie star good looks not included in this particular one, so I don't know if that...
You're more like Paul Giamatti.
Ah, I see. Okay.
Still a star.
Well, thank you nonetheless for that, and I do appreciate the introduction each week. And this week, for our subject matter, we want to get into, and I particularly want to get into something that we have alluded to multiple times in recent weeks. There's an element of professional wrestling, particularly in its modern incarnation, that has become somewhat of a staple, and I will admit, to my chagrin, it's become a bit of a staple of the presentation of professional wrestling on the national level, let's say that in particular. And that is the concept of the cinematic match. I suppose to get us started off, it would be fair for you to describe when you use the term, or when you hear the term cinematic match, what does that mean to you, so to speak?
When they say cinematic match, what they are doing is it is a match that is filmed, cut, edited, whatever preparations written out, it's so many different aspects of it, but basically it's not professional wrestling, and that kind of seems to be the consensus. Like, they'll say, oh, there was a good cinematic match, but most people say, well, that's not professional wrestling. And I completely agree. Not only do I not think it's not professional wrestling, but I think it doesn't have any place within the confines of professional wrestling. I don't think it should be on any shows. I don't think it should be on pay-per-views. I don't think it should be anything. So for me, cinematic matches are, like we talked about before, the further we inch away from the core values of our business, the further we get away. Well, this is the culmination of many times us inching away from professional wrestling. And with the pandemic and not having able to have fans live, that was a huge kick over the line as far as getting cinematic matches, like you said, to become kind of commonplace now. Here we are in 2021, and it seems like every month or every other month we're having some form of a cinematic match.
All right. Well, and as I may have said before, I often try to be fair to both sides of the argument, and this is a case where I believe you and I are largely in agreement on this topic, but I will try to, at various points, try to play devil's advocate with you a little bit and see how you react to some of my viewpoints on that. For those of you listening, I thought a great way to give an example of what we're talking about would be the most recent WrestleMania. WrestleMania 36, which of course they weren't able to have in a live venue with the intended crowd at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa Bay, or Tampa, Florida to be specific. They featured it. WrestleMania became a 2-night event, and it featured in particular 2 cinematic matches. I view them very differently, but I won't, let's talk about those 2 matches. Those 2 matches, for those who do not recall, were on one night they featured the Firefly Funhouse match, and on the other night they featured the Boneyard match. Would you like to talk a little bit about those and aspects of them and the problem you had, I presume you had with them?
Yeah. I'm really disappointed. Like, I love The Undertaker, and we've talked about this before. There's absolutely no one else in the history of professional wrestling that could have got over The Undertaker gimmick like he did, or even at all, in most cases. So, and I know he's old school, and recently he's come out and done interviews and things like that, talking about how, how much he's protected the character and protected the business over the years. But then here we are in his final moments, and he does a cinematic match. And he does a cinematic match for the sole purpose that he couldn't have a regular match because physically he was unable to do something like that. But what they had was they had a cinematic match, and this is kind of the problem with cinematic matches. Professional wrestling is always trying to be something else. You understand? Where they're trying to be like comic books, they're trying to be like music, they're trying to be like movies in this instance. And what's wrong with just being professional wrestling? What's wrong with actually giving professional wrestling fans professional wrestling? I don't understand the concept of, well, we need to make it more. No, we don't. I mean, if you like professional wrestling, then you're going to watch professional wrestling. If you like movies, you're going to watch movies. So to me, making a professional wrestling match look like a movie, and a bad movie at that, is completely the wrong direction to go. So for me, it's, if I wanted to see that, then I'd watch a movie. And that's kind of what it boils down to. Same thing with the Firefly Funhouse. That one was completely off the wall. At least the Boneyard match was trying to do somewhat of a fight. But this all took place in Bray Wyatt's mind, apparently. You know what I mean? And it was just complete, it was like an acid trip. You know what I mean? Like, and once again, if I want to see something like that, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of other things on the internet, on Netflix, on whatever that I can watch that's like that. Why do I need it in professional wrestling when all I want to see is professional wrestling? You understand? So, like, cinematic matches, obviously, not a fan. And I really think it's becoming really detrimental to our business.
All right. And I guess to kind of sum up some of my difficulties I have with this, and just so everyone knows where I'm coming from on this, particularly during the Firefly Funhouse match, it involved scenes where it was almost a "This Is Your Life" of John Cena. There was portions where he was in his Doctor of Thugonomics gear. They kind of recreated his debut against Kurt Angle and they went through, and to me that's what it almost felt like, the history of John Cena, where they were taking him through. I don't know, maybe you want to say it was a Christmas Carol kind of thing. I don't know, or This Is Your Life, or I don't know, or Wonderful Life. Maybe that's what it is. Very cinematic. All my comparisons there. But all those things, to me, hurt the suspension of disbelief, which is something we've brought up several times. And I think in a clear way. So that's where I'm coming from. But very quickly, I want to kind of, did you want to say anything else about that? But if you don't, one of the things I want to say is kind of a counterpoint. We mentioned The Undertaker in the Boneyard match, and just at I believe it was the most recent AEW pay-per-view, we had Sting, obviously a professional wrestling legend, of someone you and I both hold high respect for, involved in a match which was cinematic. It was filmed in some sort of warehouse or something somewhere. Could I say that this cinematic matches allowed those wrestlers at rather advanced ages to still be a part of the program, even though they physically might not be able to compete the way they did earlier in their career?
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that it's right. You understand? Like, we don't take a professional basketball player that's 43 years old just because we like him, and we tie the feet together of his opponent, so he can't guard him as well, to give him the advantage. You understand? If you can't physically do it, listen, that is all of our biggest nightmare. Our biggest fear is the day we have to look ourselves in the mirror and go, I can't do this anymore. I physically can't do this anymore. That's the day we all dread. Okay, but it has to come for everybody. You understand? Because that's the natural order of life. And that's the natural order of professional wrestling too. So, yes, we've gotten, The Undertaker, obviously, like I said, wasn't able physically to do that last match, so he did that thing with AJ Styles. But the thing was, that stuff is even harder physically sometimes, because they're having to stop and start. Undertaker I guess it took hours or maybe a couple days to film that, or however long it was. But, they would get going and cut, and then they would go do something else, and then he'd have to get back warm again, and do that. And even recently, because of this kind of stuff, and because of the pandemic, and, with the Edge and Orton match, like we talked about, where they had to, they decided to do some reshoots. Oh, we didn't like the way that was shot on a couple of these moves, so we're going to do some reshoots. And then in the reshoots, Edge gets injured. You understand? Like, that would be enough for me to completely cut out any kind of editing / we're going to film all this and, reshoot and all. Just because we don't have fans there, it becomes, like I said, it becomes way too in the realm of film. You understand? We're not film. We're professional wrestling, and that's the way we need to stay.
All right. I appreciate you for handling that subject, because the examples of Sting and The Undertaker in particular, someone I've mentioned I have great respect for, and I wanted him to go out in the best way possible. And it may have been a case to where, as a fan, I allowed my appreciation for the individual performer in this case to perhaps do a disservice to the industry as a whole. Even though I always long to see the Undertaker's entrance and all the aspects of I have to recognize that sometimes I have to let that go, because continue to do what we were doing was doing a disservice to the business. You did mention one thing that I think plays a pivotal role into the rise in popularity or frequency with which we see this type of match, and that is, of course, COVID. It's something we can't talk about. We can't avoid talking about, in my opinion, on this subject, because these are all things that naturally are done out of the view of a live audience. Professional wrestling traditionally is done in front of a live audience, and these types of things could not be done in that venue. But with COVID, we can't have audiences, or at least not in any, in many venues. We can't in many areas of the country. You weren't able to at all. And so it kind of said, well, we can't have fans here anyway. This gives us the opportunity. And so perhaps one of these sad, although not nearly as significant as the other aspect, the health aspects of COVID, it kind of set the stage for what we've seen. Do you think that's a reasonable point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the COVID stuff, it basically, when you're not professional wrestling, when you're not a professional wrestling booker, okay, then all of a sudden, when you're put in this situation where we don't have a live audience, we have to find a way to make this creative. We have to find a way to make this still successful and still do our job. So this becomes a thing of television writers. Well, if I write it, so it will be. You understand? Like, that's the way film. Like, if a writer writes, this guy needs to be a badass, then that character's a badass, right? That's not the way it works in professional wrestling. It has to resonate with the people enough for it to happen, right? Like, we couldn't sit there and, Barry Horowitz couldn't have been Stone Cold Steve Austin. You know what I mean? Like, same gimmick, same name, gave him the stunner, the whole thing. It still wouldn't have worked the same way, right? Because it's Barry Horowitz, right? And that's what people are missing. Professional wrestling, like we talked about, has always been a spectator sport. And it's always been based in reality. You understand? And I think that's where it needs to live and breathe and die, if it does. You understand? If we gave them legitimate professional wrestling the way that you and I know it to be the best form that we know, and the numbers dwindled and eventually it died out, you know what? I could live with that. You understand? But for me, we're trying all this new stuff, and like you said, COVID had pushed us in that direction, because a lot of people were grasping at straws of how can I be entertaining without an audience? You understand? And I understand that's a huge thing, but that's when we really needed to scale back and really show the athleticism and the hard-hitting nature of professional wrestling, instead of, let's make it more movie. Let's make it more cinematic. Let's make it more, phony to the people. And it's so disheartening, because there's so many guys out there, especially like in WWE and even AEW, that I like and I would love to see succeed in the business, and maybe they have an opportunity to change the direction of professional wrestling for the better, but they're not getting the opportunity to really do it, because they're always put in these these impossible situations, because there's no way that a cinematic match is going to revolutionize professional wrestling to the point to where, people would want to see us as their number one entertainment option. Does that make sense?
All right. I think that's certainly fair. Just so let me just say on this subject, it seems to me that one of the individuals we really need to mention and discuss is the person who I personally credit, or, discredit, depending on your point of view, with kind of popularizing this type of match. And that would be Matthew Hardy. Particularly during his time in Impact. Now, these things, as I recall, started well before COVID came along. This is something, it really, during his time in Impact Wrestling is where I first encountered this. I believe there were two versions of this. There was I think it was the final deletion with he and Jeff. There was Delete or Decay, and the Ultimate Deletion and Tag Team Apocalypto or something. I forget all the names, but there were time and time again he would tape matches on the grounds of his house, primarily is where they were. But this was all part of the broken Matt Hardy character. And I would say if any one individual made this kind of a popular thing, I would say Matt Hardy is the individual I would point to, saying he really brought this to prominence, so to speak.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, I like Matt Hardy. I've worked Matt Hardy, and we had some really good matches and things like that. But like this kind of stuff is exactly the kind of stuff I always talk about us inching further and further away. I mean, even we can credit Matt Hardy with a cinematic match, but the first time someone did a vignette and was talking to a guy and the camera was 3 feet away and they didn't put it over, that was the beginning of the cinematic match. You understand? Back in, when they had halftime heat with The Rock and Mankind, when they had that match, I liked that match specifically because it was still wrestling, right? Up until the finish, which the finish was, they lowered the forklift with a pallet on it onto the Rock, but we got this weird shot of the Rock's face as we're coming down.
Just a camera on the skid.
Yeah, like how, and that immediately just threw you out of your suspension of disbelief, and that's kind of what we're talking about, If it like I said, I love the halftime heat thing up until that particular moment, right? Because it was very reminiscent of, there's stuff like Lawler and Funk. You understand? They technically there was no fans there either. There was, they filmed it, and things like that. But, it was professional wrestling still. You understand? They didn't go cut and then go then all of a sudden they're in the parking lot or anything like that. You understand? But like, Matt Hardy, the final deletions, it's so bad. Not only is it not professional wrestling, I don't know what the hell it is. You understand? Like, to me, it's not even entertaining because it's so cringeworthy. And that's what some people like that because it's cringeworthy. They like different for the sake of being different, but for me, it's like that kills credibility in professional wrestling. Like, if I've said this before too, if a 9-year-old kid came up to you and said, "Hey, I think I saw a little bit of wrestling. I think I like wrestling. What's something you can show me to kind of put me over the edge?" Are you going to show them the final deletion? Are you going to show them the Boneyard? Are you going to show them anything like that? You understand? Because no, we want to show them Flair Steamboat. We want to show them Savage Steamboat. We want to show them Kurt Hennig and Bret Hart. We want to show them Piper and Bret Hart. We want to show them Rock Austin. There's so many different things that are absolutely professional wrestling that are better indications of our business, and that's why I'm saying, well, anything's possible. There's room enough for all of it. There's really not. You understand? We've talked about this before as far as wrestling is a niche thing. You understand? Like, yes, it's one of the bigger niches, but it's still a niche thing. When you consider that at our hottest time, we had 10, 12 million people watching Monday Night Raw, right? That at our absolute hottest time, right? And then you look at the Big Bang Theory, who in their later seasons was drawing 16 million people for just a random episode, not even a season finale or anything like that, just a random episode. So you understand what I'm saying? Like, wrestling is still a niche thing, and if you keep dwindling this down to a smaller niche, and that's exactly what's happened over the last 20 years, then eventually it's going to cease to exist, unless on a local level like we're at.
All right. Well, you're kind of stealing my thunder here. As I tried to think of my counter arguments, you've already brought up a couple of things, and one of which, at least one of which, I may still bring up a little bit later. In particular, the halftime heat. I have mentioned my admiration for Mick Foley, and his involvement of that, and it was a very unique situation. It was designed, they had to edit it to fit, and they did not know when halftime was going to start, and so they, it was kind of a unique situation. But it was one of the issues I thought of as, hey, here's an example that was kind of a precursor to what we have today. And one other place I'm going to think and see if you think it could be argued a kind of a fitting place that had some cinematic matches, and that was in Lucha Underground. It was a promotion that was more television show than it was wrestling promotion in many ways. It was very, television or cinematic or however you want to put it. It was very dramatic and scripted, so to speak. They had matches, which included some outlandish concepts and gods and whatever, and among other things. Is that a kind of place where you think, well, in that presentation, maybe a cinematic match could be considered okay for that genre?
Yeah, I'm still not a fan of it in general. Like so if WWE is going to be sports entertainment, right, like they're talking about, then they need to be more like Lucha Underground. Because those vignettes that the Lucha Underground did, visually and from a cinematic standpoint, those were really good, because Robert Rodriguez, who's the famous director, he was actually behind Lucha Underground, right? So of course he had all the, all the knows and all the hows and the whys of kind of how to do that kind of stuff. To me, it still takes away from the suspension of disbelief. I still think everything needs to be based in reality. I don't know why that's such a hard concept for people to understand. Like, yeah, but no, yeah, but I mean, it needs to take place in reality to make them believe. Same thing we talked about is if, even if this was all a television show, then we would still want people to believe in the world that we're in, right? You know what I mean? Like, we would still want to present the world as even though it would have been fictional, we still need to present it as it's a real world scenario, right? So in the real world scenario, two men are going to enter a ring and they're going to fight. So, why is there, like when the Undertaker thing, like apparently they buried him one time, but he showed up behind AJ Styles, stuff like that. I mean,
yes,
like there's just certain things that you go, well, that's movie. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want people to do that. You want people to be knee-jerk reaction to everything you do. Like, oh, wow, he really hit him with that one, that kind of stuff. But we don't get a lot of that. Lucha Underground, they get a little bit of a pass just because, of what they did. But at the same time, I want it all to be based in reality.
All right, and we've mentioned a couple of times about the live crowd, obviously, and this actually came up in some of the hardcore style matches. One of the real negative aspects of trying to do these matches that when crowds are present is because you invariably end up having things take place backstage. I have been at events where a match may even start in the ring, but then at some point they make their way to the back and something dramatic happens in the backstage, and I find myself sitting watching the screen, and I was like, well, I could do that at home. I spent a fair amount of money so I could come to this arena and watch a large screen instead of sitting at home. And obviously it's something you wouldn't want to do to a great extent with a live crowd. That being said, I'm kind of still on my devil's advocate point of view, because as I thought about this, I don't want to run the risk of saying, well, this is what's going on now and we don't like it. we're two longtime wrestling fans who are poo-pooing what is going on now, and talking about how great things used to be. But there are incidents in the past that could be construed as this type of match, and that I, in some cases, have a fond memory of. One of them that came to my mind that we have not mentioned yet, and I wanted to, and that was we already mentioned WrestleMania, but this was at WrestleMania 12. There was a backlot brawl between legend Rowdy Roddy Piper and Dustin Rhodes, a.k.a. Goldust.
Yeah, I mean, and once again, like we talked about with it, yes, it was filmed, yes, it was whatever, but at the same time, it was still professional wrestling. It was still two men meeting in a back alley to brawl. Now, where it became cinematic was with the O.J. Simpson tie-in with him chasing the Bronco, which I've been guilty of using pop culture things within the confines of professional wrestling. Well, like we did a Bird Box blindfold match, before, because Bird Box was a huge movie on Netflix where everyone was blindfolded. So I'm not opposed to things like that, but yeah, for me, it would have been much better without the O.J. Simpson thing for the suspension of disbelief like we're talking about. But besides that, it was still wrestling. It was still Piper and Goldust had this heated thing going on, and it can only be resolved in the backlot brawl.
Yes. Appropriately themed due to Goldust and Roddy Piper both, often Roddy Piper had appearances in films, and Goldust's character was based around films. And you did kind of steal my thunder on this one, because I thought about what would be my number one example of why it would be somewhat inappropriate for me to go too hard against the idea of a cinematic match without admitting one of my own favorite matches. There is a match that holds a special place in my wrestling memory as a fan. It's a fan that, as we record this, we're very nearly approaching the 40th anniversary of this match taking place. It was a match that took place in the historic Mid-South Coliseum. And the interesting thing is, of the 11,300 seats available in the Mid-South Coliseum, not a single one was occupied by a professional wrestling fan. You had two wrestling legends, Terry Funk from the Double Cross Ranch in Amarillo, Texas. You had the King of Memphis, Jerry Lawler. The only people there to witness it live were Lance Russell, a cameraman whose name I forgot to write down, and I apologize to whoever that was. And I did notice later there did appear to be a still photographer in a yellow shirt. I went back and reviewed the tape of this because I wanted to make sure I had this fresh in my mind, and that's why the figure, Lance Russell was kind enough to tell me the seating capacity of the Mid-South Coliseum. And that was the 1981 empty arena match. Would you like to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, and like we said, all that all was still professional wrestling, and it all still made sense. Yes, it was a little cinematic because, like I said, it was filmed, and obviously they probably, set up some things. But when it got started, I seriously doubt they cut, and it was all one shot. You understand? Like, I don't think it was all cut and let's do this, let's do that. I'm pretty sure it was from start to finish. It was still just it's just a wrestling match. You know what I mean? And then, of course, the match didn't actually have a finish because there was no ref, right? So what did Lawler do? Lawler kicked the spike into Funk's eye, right? Because Funk was holding the spike and he kicked his own hand into his eye. Then we got the famous my eye, from Terry Funk. So once again, as long as you do things within the confines of professional wrestling, I'm fine with it. You understand? That's what makes it fun. That's what makes it, the best way possible is by working within those confines. But with cinematic matches of today, like if they did an empty arena match today, like on AEW television today, I mean, they kind of did with the that football fiasco thing.
Yes.
See what I'm saying? What did that happen? That happened where Matt Hardy was getting drowned, and he
Yes.
came back to life or something like that.
Yes, I'm trying to remember the lake of.
Yeah, whatever it is. But
Yeah,
but also that too is that was the same week Shad Gaspar had passed away by drowning by saving his own son. And no one thought of that. You understand? Saying this. That's why a lot of these things are so bad, is because it's not necessarily that it's bad wrestling, because it is, but it's just bad in general. You understand? Like, if wrestling fans don't like it, then what makes you think anyone else is? You understand? Like, we're the biggest wrestling fans there are. You understand? And we can't stand it. So what chance does anyone else have?
All right. I did want to get that match in particular because I do want to try to be fair, because even when I look back, the comparison of the empty arena in particular, is this my example here, in comparison to the elements of the matches we're seeing today, it pales in comparison. I suppose you may not have watched in some time. The things that stood out to me as I rewatched the match, I noticed that at the beginning of the video, it involves Lance Russell having a conversation with the cameraman. Yeah. Something you would have not seen.
Like they're just waiting around. And
yeah, they're waiting around on the wrestlers to appear, and he says, "Hey, I want to do the opening shot and record it before the guys get here, because I don't actually know if either of these guys is going to show up." And he even lights a cigarette. And then, of course, when they get ready to begin filming, even though we've been watching this recording the whole time, they get ready to record the open. He, quickly throws it away, and then goes into it. And so to me, that felt kind of cinematic.
But it also felt amazing. It felt realistic too, though, right? Because it felt like he was really talking to the cameraman. It felt like he was just being himself when the camera was off, or not necessarily on him, he thought, right? So he was smoking and whatever, and then, like you said, he straightened up himself, and okay, it's time to go. Like, all that little nuanced stuff that we talk about, that's what makes wrestling real. You understand? Like, I've had, I get hit in the ribs, and instead of me going, "Oh, my ribs," I just lightly wince, and act like I just have a little trouble breathing, and people in the front row go, "Oh, man, is he okay?" Things like that. It's like, there's ways to do this in professional wrestling. And like I said, if you can make it make sense within the confines of professional wrestling, A-okay. That's that's where my problem always lies with everything, is how far away are we taking it away from the core values of professional wrestling?
Yeah, I did find myself wondering, like, to get it was a piece of the ring steps that Terry Funk used. He smashes the wooden ring steps. And one thing I did thought is that was done on the opposite side of the ring, and I thought, well, maybe they could have had that prepared. And it would have made sense to do so, because it's, if you were doing it live, you cannot count on being able to, but still, nonetheless, we're not talking about anything that resembles what we're seeing today.
No, it wasn't like, Terry Funk, like, fell down on that outside of the ring like you're talking about, and he grabbed Thor's hammer.
Right.
And then came out, and lightning came up from the Mid-South Coliseum. Then he, shocked Jerry Lawler, and then Jerry Lawler dropped his strap. You know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't anything like that. It wasn't anything incomprehensible.
Yes, and at no point were fireworks aimed at one another during the course of the match.
Yeah, Well, I mean, that could have went to the my eye thing too, but
well, that could have worked, I suppose.
But anyway, we have went past our time here on the 30-minute Midas Touch. Like I said, we will never be exactly 30 minutes. We will probably always be a little bit over. We've been under once or twice, but mostly over. But that's okay. I am your host, the Golden Boy Greg Anthony, and for my co-host, none other than the movie star. Because we're talking about cinematic matches. The movie star.
For 1 week only.
The movie star, Mark Tipton. Thank you, and goodbye.